The wind moved slowly through the tall pine trees, carrying the cold smell of rain and wood smoke. Far from the nearest village, a small cabin stood between the hills. The cabin belonged to a man named Ethan. He lived alone and worked as a woodsman, cutting trees, hunting small game, and selling firewood when he rode down to the market every few weeks. Most people in the town barely remembered his face. He spoke little, worked alone, and kept to himself. The forest had become his only friend. But loneliness has a sound. At night, when the rain fell and the wolves howled far away, Ethan heard it inside the walls. The quiet was too deep, too empty. After so many winters, his hands had grown rough, his beard uncut, his eyes tired from the same days repeating. He thought maybe a little help in the cabin would make things easier. Someone to cook, to tend the fire, to bring water from the river. The town market was crowded when he arrived that morning. Merchants shouted, horses neighed, and smoke from cooking fires drifted through the air. In one corner of the muddy square, cages stood under canvas. Inside them were creatures from beyond the forest, dark elves, half-trolls, and small goblins. The people who sold them called it servant trade, but everyone knew it was not right. Ethan hated the sight, but his cabin was too far from anyone willing to work for him. He stopped near a cage where a small figure sat still, covered with a hood and a thin cloak. She was smaller than most goblins he had seen before, almost fragile. She didn't hiss or spit like the others. She didn't even look up. Her hands rested on her knees, chained together by dull iron. "How much for that one?" Ethan asked quietly. The trader laughed, showing yellow teeth. "That one? She's useless. Doesn't speak. Doesn't fight. Probably half dead. Take her for 2 silvers if you want to bury her tomorrow." Ethan looked again. Under the hood he saw movement. A soft breath, a slight turn of the head. There was life there, quiet and faint, but life all the same. He took out 2 silver coins and dropped them into the trader's hand. "You'll regret it," the man muttered as he unlocked the cage. The small figure stepped out slowly, her legs weak. When she tried to walk, she stumbled. Ethan caught her arm gently. Her skin was cold like stone. She flinched but didn't pull away. "You can ride the mule," Ethan said softly. "Come." She said nothing. She only nodded once under the hood. They traveled together through the afternoon. Clouds gathered and rain began to fall. Ethan gave her half of his cloak, though she didn't seem to mind the cold. She stayed silent the whole way, holding onto the mule's saddle as the forest thickened around them. Every now and then, Ethan looked back. The hood covered her face completely, but he could see her small hands shaking slightly with each step. By the time they reached the cabin, night had come. Thunder rolled over the mountains. Ethan helped her down, guided her inside, and lit the old lamp. The room smelled of wood smoke and pine resin. There was a table, a small bed, and a fire crackling in the corner. "You can stay near the fire," he said. "I'll make something warm." She stood still, silent as before. Her chains rattled softly when she moved closer to the fire. The light touched her cloak, showing small green fingers holding the edge tightly. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. No answer. "It's all right if you don't want to tell me," he said after a pause. "I'll call you Mira, if that's fine." She turned her head slightly. Maybe it was the sound of her new name, or maybe surprise, but for a moment she gave a small nod. Ethan smiled. "Mira it is then." He cooked a pot of broth and poured some into a wooden bowl. She hesitated before taking it, as if unsure whether it was safe. Then she lifted the bowl with careful hands and drank slowly. Ethan sat across from her, the firelight dancing between them. After she finished, he handed her a small blanket and pointed to the cot near the fire. "You can sleep there." She lay down, still wearing the hood. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Ethan sat by the fire, staring at her shape under the blanket. She looked too thin, too fragile to be a real goblin. He wondered what kind of life she had before the cage. Rain beat softly on the roof until he fell asleep too. In the middle of the night, he woke to a faint sound. The door creaked. He reached for his axe but stopped when he saw her standing by the window. Moonlight slipped through the cracks and fell across her hands. They were pale green with strange marks, glowing faintly like veins of light beneath the skin. "You don't need to be afraid," he said quietly. She turned her head. Her voice was soft, almost human. "I'm not afraid," he blinked, "so you can speak." Her hands tightened around the window frame. "I forgot how," she whispered. "Forgot how to speak. Forgot how to trust my voice," she said. Ethan stood up slowly. He didn't want to scare her. He only nodded. "It's all right." You can rest now. You're safe here." Her eyes, still hidden by shadow, stayed on him for a moment before she nodded again and returned to her cot. Morning came with bright light through the shutters. Ethan went outside to chop wood. When he came back, the cabin was clean. The floor swept, dishes washed, fire burning steady. Mira was standing near the hearth, still silent, but moving with quiet care. "You work fast," Ethan said with a smile. She didn't reply, but her hands paused for a moment, like she was surprised someone thanked her. Days passed in that rhythm. Ethan worked outside while she kept the cabin. At first, she stayed near the walls, avoiding him. But slowly, she began to hum soft sounds while cleaning, almost like old forest songs. Sometimes he caught her watching the trees through the window, as if listening to something far away. One evening, while they ate bread and stew, Ethan finally asked, "Why do you keep your hood on? Are you hurt?" Her hands froze. For a moment, she didn't move. The fire crackled louder in the silence. He raised his hands quickly. "You don't have to tell me if it makes you sad. I just wondered." Her voice came low and careful. "People are afraid when they see me." He frowned. "Afraid? Why?" She looked down at the floor. "I don't look right." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You look fine to me." She shook her head. "No. You don't understand. If you see my face, your world will change." He gave a small laugh, not mocking, only kind. "I think my world already changed the day I met you in that cage." For a long time she was silent. Then slowly she raised her hands and untied the cord of her hood. The cloth fell. Ethan stared, unable to breathe for a moment. Her skin wasn't green like a goblin's. It was pale silver, faintly glowing in the firelight. Her hair fell like threads of moonlight over her shoulders, and her eyes were deep violet, bright and sad at the same time. He whispered, "You're not a goblin." "No," she said quietly. "I was something else once. What are you then?" She looked at the fire. "I was a guardian of the forest. Long ago, my kind kept the balance between trees and sky. But the sickness came, the roots blackened, and we fell. I was captured when I tried to save what was left." Ethan's heart ached at her calm voice. He had lived in those woods for years, yet never felt the story sleeping under the soil. "And they sold you as a goblin." She nodded. "Better to be a thing people hate than a truth they don't believe." He shook his head slowly. "That's wrong." She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly. "You would keep me here?" He met her gaze. "Yes. I'll keep you safe." She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "If you do, the forest will remember your name." "What does that mean?" The wind outside rose suddenly, branches brushing against the walls. Her eyes turned toward the sound. "It means the forest has seen you," she said, "and once it sees, it never forgets." Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through the air, as if the cabin itself listened. Mira reached out, touched his wrist lightly, and said, "Thank you, human." "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me." Outside, the storm grew quiet again, leaving only the sound of the river. Ethan stood there, still holding her gaze, knowing something old and powerful had just awakened between them, something that would change both their lives forever. The next morning came with the smell of wet leaves and clean air. Sunlight fell through the tall trees, turning drops of rain into tiny sparks on the window. Ethan woke early as usual, but something felt different. When he looked toward the hearth, he saw Mira already awake, sitting near the fire with her hands folded. She had replaced her hood but not tied it tight. The edge of her silver hair shone faintly under the light. Ethan rubbed his eyes and smiled a little. "You're up early." She nodded without looking away from the fire. "I don't sleep long." He poured water into a pot and placed it over the flames. "You'll need rest if you're going to help me today. The forest road is rough after rain." Mira tilted her head. "Where will we go?" "To the river," he said. "The bridge broke last night. If I don't fix it, the deer path will flood." She rose slowly and followed him outside. The world beyond the cabin was quiet and shining. Mist floated over the river like breath. Ethan carried a hammer and some wooden planks on his shoulder, while Mira walked behind, her bare feet light on the wet soil. Every now and then, he heard her whisper something in a language he didn't know. When they reached the broken bridge, Ethan knelt and began his work. Mira crouched beside him, watching carefully. She seemed fascinated by simple things. The sound of the hammer, the way nails bit into wood, the rough smell of pine. "You can hand me those nails," he said after a while. She obeyed, passing them one by one. Her fingers were small and steady, The air around them felt calm, as if the forest itself watched quietly. After some time, Ethan sat back and wiped his brow. All done. Mira leaned forward, touching the new planks with her fingertips. The wood under her touch shimmered faintly, as if polished by invisible light. "What did you just do?" Ethan asked. "Nothing," she said softly. "Just thank the tree for its gift." He looked at her curiously. "You mean the wood?" "Yes," she said. "Trees give their body for your shelter, fire, and bridge. They deserve thanks." Ethan smiled a little. "I never thought of it that way." "Most don't," she answered gently. "That is why the forest sleeps." They walked back together as the day warmed. When they reached the cabin, Ethan gathered dry branches for the stove. Mira went to fetch water from the river. She returned with the bucket balanced on her head, her steps sure and graceful. Ethan couldn't help noticing that the water inside barely rippled. He watched quietly, wondering again what she really was. As days passed, they fell into a strange rhythm of peace. She spoke more now, though her words were still quiet and simple. She asked about human tools, about roads and towns, about the stars seen through smoke instead of clouds. Ethan told her what he knew, and she listened with a kind of wonder, as if learning about another world. Sometimes he caught her standing outside at night, her face lifted to the sky, whispering to the wind. When he asked what she said, she would smile faintly and reply, "Just old names." One evening he returned from chopping wood and found her kneeling by the river. The water glowed around her hands with soft green light. He froze. "What are you doing, Mira?" he asked carefully. She looked up, startled, the glow fading like mist in sunlight. "Healing," she whispered. "The river was hurt. Rivers can get hurt." "Yes. Poisoned roots, broken stones, forgotten songs. I only mended the current a little." Ethan walked closer, watching the water flow smoother than before. "You can do that?" She lowered her eyes. "Once I could do more. Now only small things." He crouched beside her. "Small things matter too." She smiled slightly, and for the first time he saw warmth in her eyes, not just sadness. Later that night, as they ate, the wind began to howl outside. Lightning flashed beyond the hills, lighting the forest in silver lines. Ethan checked the door and made sure it was barred. "A storm again," he muttered. Mira's face grew tense. "Not storm. Something else." "What do you mean?" "The forest calls." Before Ethan could speak, a loud crack sounded from deep among the trees, followed by a distant roar. Not thunder, not any animal he knew. The ground trembled slightly. Mira stood, her eyes bright with fear. "They woke." "Who woke?" Ethan asked. "The roots," she said. "They remember the sickness. It spreads again." He grabbed his axe from the wall. "Stay here," he said. "I'll see what it is." "No," she said quickly. "Don't go. You'll not come back the same." He gave her a steady look. "I can't hide if something's wrong. This is my home too." For a moment they stared at each other, the firelight flickering between them. Then she nodded, though her hands shook. "If you go," she whispered. "Carry this." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small wooden charm carved with strange patterns. It glowed faintly in her palm. Ethan hesitated but took it. "What is it? A part of the old forest's heart. It will protect you once." He tucked it inside his shirt and stepped into the rain. The forest beyond the cabin was darker than usual, alive with whispers. Every shadow seemed to move. He followed the sound until he reached the hollow where he usually trapped deer. There he saw the ground torn open, roots as thick as arms coiled from the soil, twisting and writhing like snakes. Ethan froze. A foul smell rose from the pit, sharp and sweet like rot. Inside the moving roots something pulsed, black sap glowing faintly red. He had seen dead trees before, but never anything like this. Then he heard a soft cry. From behind the roots came a small animal, a fox trapped by vines that wrapped around its legs. It struggled weakly. Ethan swung his axe down. The blade bit through one vine, then another. Black sap splashed across his hands. It burned cold. He grit his teeth and cut faster until the fox broke free and ran. The roots turned toward him like living things. Ethan stepped back, ready to run, when a blast of silver light flashed through the clearing. Mira stood at the edge of the pit, her hood gone, her hair glowing like fireless flame. "The forest knows you," she said softly. "Now it listens." She raised her hands, and light spread from her fingers into the roots. The ground shook again. The vines shrieked. pulling back into the earth like retreating worms. Within moments, the pit sealed itself, leaving only the smell of rain and burned leaves. Ethan stared at her, breathless. "What did you do?" "I reminded them of who they were," she said weakly, "but it won't last." She swayed and nearly fell. Ethan ran forward and caught her. Her skin was cold as snow. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "It takes strength I don't have anymore." He held her close, feeling her heartbeat faint and fast. "You saved me. You saved this forest." She looked up, her violet eyes dim now. "No, I only delayed it. The sickness grows deeper every time a tree dies without song." He didn't understand fully, but he could feel the truth in her words. The forest had always felt heavy lately, quieter each season. Now he knew why. He helped her back to the cabin. She leaned against him, too weak to walk alone. When they reached the fire, he wrapped her in a blanket and set warm tea beside her. "Thank you," she murmured. "You don't need to thank me," he said. She smiled faintly. "Humans always say that when they mean they care." Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe we do." Silence filled the cabin again, but it wasn't lonely anymore. The rain outside softened to a gentle rhythm. Mira closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "Will it come back?" he asked quietly. "Yes. Unless we heal the heart of the forest. And how do we do that?" She opened her eyes halfway. The sickness came from what humans built long ago. Metal under the roots, fire under the soil. "We must find it and end it." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll find it." She looked at him as if trying to see whether he meant it. "The forest will not be kind," she warned. "Neither am I when something threatens my home," Ethan replied. She smiled again, a tired but true smile. Then she whispered something in her old language, a soft melody that drifted around the cabin like wind through leaves. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he felt warmth spread in his chest, gentle and deep. Before she slept, she said one more thing. "When dawn comes, follow the river north. You will see the old stones." That is where the heart began to rot. Ethan nodded, watching her fall into rest. The firelight danced across her silver hair, and outside, the forest seemed to breathe slower, waiting. He sat beside her through the night, listening to the quiet. For the first time in years, the woodsman who once loved silence now feared it, because he knew that beyond the stillness, something ancient was waking again. The morning air was crisp, filled with the smell of wet pine and damp earth. Ethan rose early and quietly packed a small bag. Mira stirred beside the fire, stretching her silver arms, her violet eyes opening slowly. She looked at him, calm but wary, as if reading his thoughts. "We need to follow the river," she said softly. "The stone's there, remember?" He nodded. "I understand." "Are you coming?" She shook her head. "My strength is small now. The forest will guide you, but I cannot go farther yet." Ethan hesitated. He wanted to refuse, to carry her with him, but he knew she was right. She had already done too much. He took the charm she had given him yesterday and secured it inside his coat. The soft green glow was faint, but it hummed against his chest. He stepped outside. The river ran strong, swollen from the rain. The current carried branches and leaves, reflecting the light like broken mirrors. The forest seemed alive in a new way, rustling and whispering as though it watched him move through the trees. He walked carefully along the bank, the mud sucking at his boots. Every now and then he glimpsed strange shapes beneath the water, roots thick and writhing like the fingers of something enormous buried just below the surface. His hands gripped his axe tighter. After several hours, he reached the place Mira had mentioned. The stones jutted from the riverbed, worn smooth by centuries of water but now blackened with sap that shimmered red in the sunlight. The air here was heavier, filled with a smell like burnt wood and old metal. Ethan knelt beside the first stone, touching it lightly. A vibration ran up his arm, faint and cold. He heard a whisper behind him. He spun around, expecting Mira, but no one was there. The trees swayed and the wind carried a faint voice. "Return what was taken or the forest dies." He swallowed. This was more than a simple sickness. The roots, the river, the stones, they all carried a memory, a wound left long ago. He examined the stones. Some had carvings, strange angular symbols he didn't recognize. They pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He pressed his hand against one. The ground trembled and water from the river surged upward, spraying his legs. A shape moved beneath the surface, a dark mass of roots and black sap, curling toward him like a living creature. Ethan lifted his axe and struck. The root recoiled with a loud crack. He swung again and again, each strike sending a vibration through the stones and air. The black mass retreated slowly into the river, leaving ripples that danced like fire across the surface. A voice whispered in his mind, faint but clear. "The heart is broken. Mend it or all falls." He realized then what he must do. The stones were not only markers. They were pieces of something greater, something buried beneath the riverbed and deep into the forest soil. He looked around, searching for a pattern. The carvings glimmered faintly in the sunlight, guiding him upstream. As he moved, he noticed small things changing. A tree leaning too far had its roots glowing silver beneath the soil. A fallen branch shivered as if alive. Every living thing near the river seemed aware of his steps, watching, waiting. After hours of walking, he reached a clearing where a large stone slab lay half buried. Black sap ran from its cracks like veins. The air was thick, heavy with the forest's memory. Ethan approached carefully, feeling the pulse beneath his feet. It was slower than the stones downstream, more deliberate, as if something enormous lay hidden beneath. He remembered Mira's words. The heart began to rot here. He knelt and pressed his palms to the stone. The black sap hissed faintly. Then a thought came to him, a rhythm, almost a song, faint in his mind. He closed his eyes and listened. The forest spoke, but not in words. It spoke in pulses, in vibrations that ran through the stones and roots. The sickness was a wound in the memory of the land, a wound left by humans long ago. Ethan opened his eyes. He remembered the charm. Slowly, he placed it on the stone. The green glow spread outward, faint but steady, touching the black veins. The veins shivered, retracting slightly as if unsure what to do. He whispered softly, "I am human, but I wish to heal." The stones pulsed again. The water in the river behind him trembled. A tendril of black sap rose like smoke, twisting toward the charm. Ethan struck with his axe, and the sap recoiled. Again he swung, and again, each strike guided by the pulse in his chest, the green charm keeping the dark veins at bay. Suddenly, the earth beneath the stone cracked. A deep voice rumbled through the clearing like a mountain speaking. "Why do you touch what is broken?" Ethan swallowed, unsure if he spoke aloud or in his mind. "I do not wish to harm. I wish to heal." The ground shivered. A thin shaft of light broke through the clouds above, striking the stone. The black sap hissed, then retreated into the earth. Ethan felt the pulse change. Slower now, steady, like a heart restarting. He sank to his knees, exhausted. The air smelled clean now, and the forest around him seemed to sigh. The branches swayed gently. The river hummed softly, and somewhere far away a bird called as if waking from a long sleep. Ethan looked at the charm. It had dimmed but still glowed faintly. He understood that the work was not over, but this small act had given the forest a chance. The pulse beneath the stone was alive again, steady, waiting for the next step. He gathered himself and turned back toward the river. He felt a presence before he saw it. Mira stood at the edge of the clearing, her silver hair glimmering, her violet eyes bright with concern. "You did it?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Only a little." "The heart is still weak," she nodded. "We will continue." They walked back together, the forest quiet now, almost reverent. Ethan noticed that the animals seemed closer, birds hopping beside his feet, squirrels pausing on branches to watch, deer lingering near the trees. The forest had recognized him, accepted him as a friend. As night fell, they returned to the cabin. Mira tended the fire while Ethan cleaned his axe and set his pack down. The rain began again, soft and steady. He watched her carefully. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened but still tired. "You are strong," he said. "Stronger than I imagined." She smiled faintly. "I am old, I have seen many seasons, but strength alone cannot heal the world." He knelt beside her. "We will find a way together." She looked up at him, violet eyes wide. "Together," she whispered. "I have not said that to anyone in a long time." Outside, the wind moved softly, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Ethan felt something shift in the air. The forest was alive, awake and waiting for what was to come. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not for himself but for the woods that had been silent too long. Mira sat beside him, quiet now, but her presence was enough. The night was no longer empty. The forest breathed around them, and somewhere deep in the roots and river, the pulse of the heart continued, steady and strong, waiting for the next step of healing. Ethan knew that the journey would not be easy. There would be more black veins, more roots twisted by time and human hands, more sickness to face. But he also knew that with Mira, he could face it. She was no goblin, no servant, no weak creature sold in a cage. She was guardian, protector, and guide. And he, a simple woodsman, had been chosen to walk beside her. Together, they would follow the river, uncover the heart's secrets, and perhaps, in the end, restore the forest to what it once was. The storm outside softened to a gentle patter against the roof. Inside, the cabin was warm, lit by fire and hope. Ethan and Mira sat quietly, listening to the forest breathe, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new strength. And for the first time, Ethan felt that being alone in the woods was no longer loneliness. It was the beginning of something greater. Something alive, something worth protecting. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the wet forest floor. Ethan packed a small bag with food and water, checking the axe at his side. Mira stood near the cabin door, her silver hair glowing faintly in the early light. Her violet eyes focused on the river that wound through the trees. "We follow the river today," she said softly. "The stones ahead will show us the next part of the heart." He nodded. "Are you coming?" She shook her head. "I will stay and watch the forest here. It is safer for you to go alone this time." He hesitated, then said, "I understand. Be careful." She offered a faint smile. "Always." Ethan began walking along the riverbank. The water flowed swiftly, carrying leaves and small branches. The forest was alive in a way he had never noticed before. Birds called to one another. Small animals darted through the underbrush, and the wind whispered faintly through the trees. It was as if the forest itself guided his steps. After walking for hours, he reached a part of the river where stones jutted from the water like old teeth. Black veins ran across them, glowing faintly red, and the air smelled of damp earth and old wood. He knelt beside the largest stone, feeling the pulse beneath his fingers. It was stronger than the previous stones, alive with memory, and it throbbed like a heartbeat. A voice whispered faintly in his mind, "Heal what was stolen, restore what was broken." Ethan pressed the charm against the stone. The green glow spread slowly, touching the black veins. They recoiled slightly like a child afraid of punishment. He focused on the pulse, imagining warmth spreading through it, imagining the forest alive and whole again. A tendril of black sap rose from the river, writhing like a living snake. Ethan swung his axe, and the dark vein recoiled. The charm hummed faintly in his chest, protecting him. Again he struck, precise and careful, guided by the rhythm he felt in the forest and the pulse in the stone. The veins began to retreat into the riverbed. The water's surface shimmered like silver under the sun. Ethan knew that the heart beneath the stones was awakening. It was fragile, but it was alive. He paused to catch his breath, then noticed movement near the riverbank. A small fox emerged, its fur wet but shining. It paused, looked at him with bright eyes, and ran along the river as if leading him somewhere. Ethan followed, trusting the animal's guidance. The fox led him to a grove of ancient trees, their roots tangled and twisted. In the center, a stone slab lay cracked and glowing faintly red, veins of black sap running across it like open wounds. He knelt beside the stone, placing the charm on its center. The green glow spread across the veins, pushing the darkness back. He closed his eyes and focused, imagining the forest breathing evenly, roots and river and trees alive and safe. A voice rumbled beneath him, low and powerful. "Why do you touch what has been broken?" "I wish to heal," Ethan answered quietly, not aloud. The stone trembled. Light shot upward from the cracks, illuminating the grove. The black veins hissed, then pulled back into the earth. The river nearby flowed gently, clear and bright. Ethan opened his eyes. The heart of the forest had begun to mend. He rose slowly and looked around. The trees swayed as if in gratitude. Animals moved cautiously closer. Even the wind seemed lighter, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. He returned to the cabin that evening, exhausted, but filled with a new energy. Mira was waiting near the door. She smiled faintly, her eyes shining. "You did well," she said. "We still have more to heal," he replied. She nodded. "The forest's heart is vast. Each stone, each root, each stream carries its memory. But you have proven worthy. The forest trusts you." Ethan helped her gather water and food. Together they prepared the cabin for the night. Outside, the forest was quiet but alive, as if it was watching over them. That night, Ethan sat by the fire while Mira traced patterns in the air with her fingers. Faint green lines glowed, connecting the hearth to the corners of the cabin. as if marking the forest's pulse even inside their home. "You are different from anyone I have ever met," Ethan said quietly. She looked up at him. "And you," she said, "are different from other humans. You see the forest, not just the trees." He smiled faintly. "I only see what is in front of me." "Sometimes that is enough," she whispered. For several days they continued their work. Each morning, Ethan followed the river, guided by the stones, the fox, and the pulse beneath the soil. Mira stayed near the cabin, using her light to mend small wounds in the roots and streams close to home. Slowly, the black veins retreated and the river ran clear. The trees leaned toward each other as if relieved. One evening, while they rested by the cabin, Mira spoke quietly. "The heart has not fully awakened. The sickness will return unless we confront its origin." "And where is that?" Ethan asked. "Deep under the mountains," she said. "There is a hollow where the first trees of the forest were planted. There the corruption began. If it spreads, it will undo all we have done." He nodded. "Then we go there." She looked at him, worry in her violet eyes. "It is dangerous." "Even I cannot go, I have to," Ethan said. "This forest is my home too." They planned carefully. Ethan gathered provisions, sharpening his axe, packing the charm, and listening to Mira's instructions. She showed him which paths were safe, which routes to avoid, and how to feel the pulse of the earth to guide his steps. The journey through the mountains was long and difficult. Steep slopes, tangled roots, and sudden drops tested his strength. Yet he felt no fear, only determination. The forest seemed to guide him, opening paths, showing hidden footholds, and warning him of danger. At last, he reached the hollow. It was vast and dark, the walls lined with stone and roots. The air smelled of earth and decay. At the center, a massive stone slab pulsed with red-black veins. The river ran beneath it, hidden but audible, carrying the memory of centuries. Ethan knelt, placing the charm at the center. The green glow spread outward, touching the veins. The pulse beneath the stone trembled. The corruption fought back, black sap rising like snakes, twisting toward him. He swung his axe again and again, guided by the pulse, protecting the forest's heart with each strike. The black veins hissed and retracted. Finally, light broke through the cracks in the stone, shining upward. The pulse beneath his hand steadied, strong and clear. The forest exhaled. The river below hummed a soft song, roots twisted gently as if stretching after a long sleep. The corruption had been driven back. Exhausted, Ethan sank to the stone. The forest felt alive around him, safe for the first time in ages. Somewhere far above, a bird called, and the wind carried the sound like a blessing. He returned to the cabin. Mira was waiting, her eyes bright, a faint smile on her lips. "You did it," she said softly. "The forest will heal now. Your courage has restored its heart." He smiled, though tired. "I only followed your guidance." She shook her head gently. "No, you saw what others could not. You believed when others feared. That is why the forest lives." They stood outside, looking at the trees, the river, the hills beyond. The forest was quiet but alive, its pulse steady and strong. The black veins were gone, replaced with silver light that shimmered along roots and stones. Animals moved freely. Birds called, and the wind whispered in soft patterns. Ethan placed a hand on Mira's shoulder. "Together," he said. She looked up at him, violet eyes bright. Together. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky gold and red. Inside the cabin, firelight danced across the walls. Outside, the forest slept peacefully, breathing evenly for the first time in centuries. Ethan sat by the hearth, Mira beside him. The storm had ended, the corruption banished. The forest had accepted them both, guardian and human, side by side. And for the first time, Ethan felt at home. Not alone, not lonely, but part of something greater. He had found a friend, a guide, and a purpose in a world alive with memory and life. The forest had chosen him, as he had chosen to protect it. And together, they would watch over it for all the days to come. The river flowed softly beyond the cabin, carrying leaves, water, and light. And the forest whispered thanks in a language older than time itself. Ethan looked at Mira, her silver hair glimmering, her violet eyes gentle. The journey had ended, but their bond, and the pulse of the forest, would continue forever. The wind moved through the trees, soft and steady. The woodsman and the forest guardian sat together, watching the last light fade, knowing that their world had changed forever, and for the better.